Right, we're back at Gluware Intent 19, and we're going to continue with some demos from Merck showing off what they are doing with Gluware, and going to hand it off to Mike and Sal again.
Great, thanks. All right, now the fun part, right? Seeing some real work get done. Well, not really, it's a demo lab, but we'll still have some fun with it anyway. We can break it, it's fine. We've invited Alex, one of our system engineers, up to run the hands-on, because I cannot type and talk at the same time. So with that, we're going to just first, we're going to do 3 examples based on Merck, and then a few of the other things you heard about, audit and upgrade, we're going to actually do in a little further segment with another customer. So very first here, we want to jump into a use case that is really kind of what I consider the starting point with Gluware, which is using the device manager, which is a built-in component of Gluware Control. And this is about getting your hardware and software inventory. So the Gluware Control engine, all we need are IP addresses and credentials. Our engine runs either on-prem, you can install it as a virtual machine, one or more virtual machines in your infrastructure, or we can run from the cloud. When we run from the cloud, we need to hop through a proxy so we can hit your network devices. But essentially what we've built into the product is the ability to take a real inventory, real-time inventory. So we go out and connect to all the devices, and we have a piece of software called the Device Detect Engine that runs a series of commands to determine what vendor it's talking to, what operating system. Once it knows those pieces, like on a Cisco, it's pulling a show run, show hard, show ver, show, bunch of show commands, and then pulling those into a data model. And so it gives you a real-time inventory of what's on the network, and it's extensible, meaning if there's something else you want to capture, it can be added to it. So with that introduction, one new piece to mention was with our 3.5 release we announced last week. It's been in production at several customers for the last several weeks. We've taken what we've talked about with the Cisco APIs, Cisco support APIs, which do need your credentials. We don't provide your own Cisco support credentials. You hook those into the product, and then we can go and pull SmartNet, end of life, into sale, and the security advisories on that hardware based on the inventory. So those are some of the pieces we're going to show you here. So with that, why don't we switch over? Oh, yep, I got the controller. If you don't mind, can you back out to the... All right, so Alex is logged into Gluware Control here. It is multi-user and multi-tenant. With a tenant, we call it an organization. That just means that, let's say your data center nodes are separately administered than your WAN nodes, or maybe there's a team of people who do your firewalls or load balancers. You can set those up as separate organizations. Multi-user with multiple forms of authentication into the platform, supporting LDAP, Radius, using your own Radius to authenticate into the platform. So once you're signed in, if you want to jump back to the home page there, you kind of select your app, and in this case, Device Manager, you navigate into, and what Alex is showing here is you haven't, okay, so it's a clean slate. So Alex, maybe you want to talk to what you're showing.
Right. So what you're seeing here, this is from scratch as you. You able to hear?
Is it unmuted?
It is a mute button.
Yeah, so basically what we've done here, right, this is a clean import of devices, and I have not done any discovery. You can do an import through a CSV, or you can do an import from your model editor, or just simply add device one by one. So once you have your inventory, it's basically a matter of, you can do the discovery on one, or you can select all, and I will do a live discovery that kicks off, and you have the discovery status. That is, the engine is logging into each device and running the set of commands into each of those devices and gathering information about it. In this case, one of them has already returned.
So what you're seeing is there's some delays in terms of running all the commands that need to complete and then pulling that data in. The engine is actually very highly scalable. The piece that actually goes and talks to the nodes is called provisioning engines, and we can spin up multiple, and we can even place them geographically where it makes sense. And so that was actually an enhancement that came out 3.1 or 3.2, I can't remember the release now, but essentially we decoupled the provisioning engine from our primary orchestration engine, giving us massive scalability. In fact, we've done changes to 14,000 nodes in under an hour, to give you a sense of scale.
So what we've done here is we discovered the inventory and information about the devices. What we haven't done yet is once you do provide your access to the Cisco API, your credentials, you have access to be able to discover information about the hardware and the vulnerabilities and the life or any other information about it. So that's what I'm about to execute here right now. So this goes out to the Cisco API, does a call, and does a call on the SKU numbers of the platforms and on the software running on those devices as well. So that should just take a second here.
So again, Alex is demonstrating something we're going to go into depth a little bit further into how Gluware can interact with third-party APIs. We're actually consuming Cisco APIs. This has been productized, right, into Gluware, where it's something you don't have to build or do anything, it just is working. There's other examples that we'll talk to, again, in more depth later, where we can interact with other APIs like ServiceNow or Jira or an IPAM for address management. So Gluware certainly has the ability to kind of talk API, in this case, not necessarily down to network nodes, but in this case, kind of east-west to other aspects of the management plane, in this case, a vendor API that, is slow to come back. But that's why I'm tap dancing.
So the return information, right, on these devices that I have in the lab, I don't have any support contract. There is no end of life available to them. I do see some high advisories on vulnerability information, right? So, and I can click into the details of what that information is, right? Based on the iOS that I have running on that device, there's multiple vulnerabilities detected. You can go into a more in-depth view of what those vulnerabilities are, and you can also go read that information on the Cisco site, right? It goes directly into there. You also have the capability of saying, what are the versions that are affected, and you have quite the large list of iOS versions that are running with that vulnerability.
So a couple comments on this is that this is a new integration, and we're getting some great feedback from customers. One is I've done the assessment, and let's say you still have to do a determination of what is my risk to this advisory. And so one feature request that came is the ability to just say, okay, I've assessed this one, let's suppress this because it doesn't affect this. So something we're definitely looking at. Another piece is when you read these descriptions, some of them describe if you're using certain configuration statements. So it's not just the operating system level, but it actually dives into the config statements being used at expose. At our current state or assessment, unfortunately, we can't just translate a vulnerability into an audit policy, but we do pretty easily give you the ability to just take config statements, put them right in the audit engine, and then go assess the network to see if you are exposed. And so right now, it's a little manual translation from the advisory into the audit engine. But once you have it, it's a one-click to determine, do I have any violators? And you're going to see that in an upcoming demo. So that, from an inventory and the PCert component, this is pretty much, just wanted to show you that it's real. It pulls all this stuff in real time. Alex, if you can scroll to the left on the lower grid, we were at a customer who was using a vendor product, won't name vendors in the actual product, but they said, we had feature requests in forever to extend the commands and pull in a certain stat. They wanted the uptime stat in the grid. And so, we went on a little break, and one of our engineers in the room extended our capability in a matter of minutes, and it kind of came back from a short break, and he said, oh, that feature you wanted? Oh, it's in the product now. Obviously, we hadn't pushed it to production, but in that instance, we reran inventory, and it was pulling in the uptime stat. So just an example of that, the Gluware team is responsive, and our ability to extend what we're pulling from the network is definitely certainly extensible to your requirements. So with that, we're going to, let me jump here to set up demo number 2, which is based on config modeling. Again, we described config modeling in the first part, but let's say the summary level view of config modeling is the ability to, and we're not didn't switch here. Don't want to. Sorry. You guys missed my cool translation. Or here we go. I need to put it back into. Okay, ready for it? Ooh. I wanted to make sure you saw that. All right, thank you. I know, PowerPoint automation, and sadly, I didn't even do it myself, so. Okay, config modeling. Again, it's an approach where it takes older concepts that people have been using of, taking existing CLI with the 20-year-old load and pray technologies, just take CLI and push it. It takes templating and it modernizes all those concepts. So what we do is essentially break down monolithic CLI configuration into feature components that, again, behind the scenes are data modeled. We happen to wrap it in JSON-based coding. To the end user or CLI user, you don't really have to care about it, but just to know that there's underlying technology that is data modeling this and making it automatable and reusable. And the fact that we pull from your existing device or example configurations to create these models, and these become the desired state, the intended policy that the declarative engine will go and compare and read, compare, verify, and then make the required changes to make that desired state the end state. So again, we'll go back to Merck's use case of deploying QoS.
Sure.
And again, with QoS, it took updating SNMP for monitoring and NetFlow for monitoring, and then other components of automation. So with that, we'll jump back to the live demo setup. Switching. We're changing HDMI inputs here, right? Okay. So Alex, maybe best if you drive and talk, unless you.
So with the use case with Merck, right, they had their quals policy set up, and it was just a matter of trying to build those models inside Gluware. So as we explained earlier, right, we created the different blocks of, that represents your CLI. So I have my access list, right, and of course we sanitize this. It's not exactly Merck's information here. But yeah, you build your access list.
Only kidding.
Yeah, we build your access list, right? Then you got your class maps, and with the class maps, right, even though we can create multiple models or multiple sets of class maps within here, we don't have to use the intended what's in here, right? So what I mean by that is I could have multiple sets of class maps in here, and I could use a filtering that's only going to call a section of them. Right, so you can use a further filtering to create more of a focus point on what you're trying to configure, right? And on top of that, right, there are certain types of CLIs that are supported in one devices but not supported in other type of devices. So in your CLI model, you have the option to create, this is compatible by OS version or by SKU version, by SKU number. So at the time that the engine is doing the provisioning and is logged into that device, he understands the SKU number of that device, and he says, hey, I matched that regular expression. This CLI is supported on this device or not, right? And same thing with the OS version as well. So we have access lists, we have the class maps, then we have policy maps. Again, with the policy maps, I can have two separate set of policy maps, but I don't have to call out these full policies, as I can go through the filters and say I only want to do the tagging of the packets. And for another one, I want to do the queuing of the packets, right? And the other condition as well was on which interfaces to configure the correct access, to the correct policies, right? What interfaces do I want to push that to? And with the conditional, advanced rendering conditions, you have the capability of, say, if an interface has matching a regular expression, which can be defined by the user, anything that exists on that interface, in this case was simple switch port access mode, you choose one type of policy. And a different case would be if you have switch port mode trunk, right? Then you select a different service policy. So with the model built up, right, I have everything attached to the assembly, and right now we're going to run a preview to make sure that this is what you intended to push. When it comes to preview, you can, well, when it comes to actions, you can schedule that action and to be performed at a later date, or you can just do it manually, right, which is what I want to do right now. But with the preview, you have 3 types of preview. You can do a model validation to make sure that your models are all built and connected and you don't have anything missing. You can do initial preview, which is going to give you a printout based on the models alone without comparing what's running on the device. And then the connected preview, which is the top level that's going to give you a comparison or a preview of what the engine is about to do, considering what's on your running configuration. So that's what we're going to do right here. It's going to connect to a live switch. And in the log view, you have the capability of select which log levels you want to see. I'm going to remove debugging. I don't want to see the CLI. I just want to see the information that's what the engine is telling me and giving me some responses there.
Yeah, and Alex, I would like to show everyone how the model is built and the show commands that we're using to figure out what we're going to land and what we're going to put out on the box after this runs.
Okay. So yeah, based on this preview, right, this is comparing against what's running on the configuration. I can see the full logs. I can download the logs in case there's some troubleshooting that's needed and I need to go see everything that has happened. And I can create a ticket with Gluware, right, if that's the case. I can see the CLI, and this is the full interaction that the engine has had with the device. Any command that was sent and received in the output will be displayed here, right?
And this is your change request. This is exactly what the tool is going to do. And you can simply copy and paste it into your change request because as the pendulum has swung very far in our direction, the scrutiny that changes are getting now are very, very deep, right? For obvious reasons. But that's, the get out of jail free card.
So when I click on, so that was the raw CLI, and that's the full interaction with the device. When I go to process CLI, this is the engine figuring out, based on the decision making that I found, right? I found some ACLs that match my naming convention that are existing on the configuration, but it's not in my model. So the engine is deciding to remove those ACLs first, and then it's going to go ahead, in order, it's going to configure my access list. Even though in my model I don't specify the sequence number, the engine is intelligent enough that we can specify the sequence number of what order your ACL is going to, or the rule for your ACL is going to be put in. Then it will,
and that's a good point, because if you don't turn on any type of QoS on a box, it's going to put on auto QoS on a switch. And that's exactly what we removed. And quite often we find a new installation, no one has turned on QoS because it's a very long quality service policy. And that's what Alex and I worked on, to actually remove the QoS and land the proper quality service on switches as well as routers now.
right.
One other point to highlight here, and again, when you sit down with sales management, they tell you things you don't hear from Sal, but they were saying like it's extremely important to have that logging, to have the trackability as to who did what and what exactly they did, right? So this embedded in the project, it's capturing the users, and then you have a full log of everything that you've done, including all the interaction with the device. So a side benefit is if you hit an issue with the device, let's say you expose a vulnerability or a bug or something happens, and the vendor says, well, send me your logs. Well, it's capturing everything, so you can very easily send it off to the vendor. And a third piece, which came from Sal's management too, and actually just made it in this release. Alex, if you can zoom in on the node map. Again, we've deconstructed a monolithic config file into feature blocks, right? Well, now you start to get into, well, who's changed it and when and what version is it at now? So what you see here is these feature blocks, every piece of, let's say we're kind of codifying your show run in the land of Cisco. Every piece becomes a versioned piece of policy. So anytime you change that policy and hit save, we're incrementing the version number on it. And so you actually can version control, individual policies like your SNMP or your class maps or your, as you can see, these are very early. Alex had a new installation, was just beginning to make changes. But actually version controlling your configuration down to a policy level is a very interesting notion, and it's something a lot of people are interested in.
So Alex, let's just take a quick look at the whole way the thing is constructed, from a feature concept to where the engine is doing a show run, how it's looking at the regex, and how it's landing the commands, because I think that is a very important distinction of what Gluware is doing.
Right. So, as Sal mentioned, the feature policy here, right, is a combination that's going to build the full quaz, right? Because sometimes in some items you could be just using one line of command, and it could be just one thing. In the case of quaz, that combination is what's going to build my full quaz model, and that's the access list, the class maps, policy map, and including adding the service policy commands to the interface. At that point, then your full quaz is configured, at least on that device. So as we combine all of these items here, right, while in the visual view here in the node instance map, they're not organized in a way that is going to be, that they're going to be deployed. But the way that they're going to be deployed is in the way that's organized in the way that I select them, right? And I can move them up, I can add more items to it, right? I can filter them out. So everything is built through here. So this is the combination, is the feature policy. With this feature policy, you also have the capability of, over here it was just a simple form that we created, but this form can be as extensive and it can be built by the user within the UI itself, right? So this form, you can create radio boxes, you can create arrays, you can create strings, anything that you want to be able to expose as a variable in your configuration, you can build it through the service policy. So at that time that you were doing a provisioning, you provide your variable points here, right? And then in the CLI piece, that's where you could call those variables. Now, if I look at the JSON view here, I'll be able to see, right, how do I call that variable, right? So we do what we call, at least when it comes from Gluware, if you're providing, there's two methods that you can provide a variable. One of them is when you provide it through your model, and we call that with just a $ context. So we replace the form address here in this JSON with context. So if I were to call $ context.interface.bandwidth, I would get the value in that form, in that JSON. Another way that you can provide custom values is discovered from the configuration itself. And that's a discovered item, right? That through the set of show run commands, we can create regular expressions that's going to grab that value, load that variable, that value into a variable, and allows you to reuse that value somewhere else.
We'll show that in the
And we're going to show that next, right?
then
Or not next, but in the next demo. So the CLI, getting a step deeper into this, into what was built here, right? The CLI command group is essentially I make a reference to my CLI command list, which is my raw CLI. And within here, I use regular expressions to say, hey, I want to manage any class or policy map that matches with this name, right? And this is full regex support. You can include one, as many, create ORs, right? So you can do pipe through. I want to manage any policy map that begins with this, or that.
And show the show run that's pulling that.
So
Alex,
that's,
right?
yeah, that's what I was
Because
going to
this
get
is
to,
really
right?
The whole structure.
And attached to that item is the what we call the concept item. And the concept item is essentially how do we read that configuration that's going to be related with this specific item. In this case, is a policy map, right? And we precede a set of these concept items, and we're constantly updating them and adding them as we discover more, whether it's use cases or new commands that come out, as the end user also has that ability to create them themselves. So in this case, right, in order for us to compare just the policy map, we don't want to compare the full configuration to what we've built. This is the command that will run, right, do a show run all section policy map is going to get me a printout of any policy maps existing on the configuration, and then it's going to use that output to compare versus what I've modeled, and then the engine will have the decision making of what needs to be removed, what needs to be added, or what needs to be updated, and we'll make the changes accordingly. So while it may seem, even though over here in the visual on the node map it's hierarchical, right? the execution process is going to execute from this end first, right? It executes the concept items. It does the information gathering first, gathers the information, then processes to the filterings in the CLI command group, and then based on that, whether it matches my naming conventions or it matches the sections of the configuration that I want to apply, then the engine at that point will have, okay, this is what I have modeled versus what I found, and matches my naming conventions. Now, what do I need to add or remove?
So QoS is a more complex example, obviously. We dove into something that is not a trivial example, but it is showing you the power, the flexibility. Just to show something simple, is there NTP, or I can't read your screen very well from here, but just, to get the concept of a very simple feature, as you look at, again, the building blocks of what you're able to automate, it's very straightforward to say, okay, here's how we configure the statement, here's how we read the statement, and how we can actually automate it. And then by simply tying it to an assembly, we now, for all the devices that have that assembly, again, kind of like an intelligent template, we're going to make that change.
So in this right here, right, so this is one of the most simple setups that you would have. Let's say if I want to update just usernames across all my devices. This is what you would create, right? So I have my concept item that's related with usernames, and I have the show run command that's going to gather that information, right? I have the CLI that I want to be able to output, right? And in this case, I'm providing variables that you can do a mix and match in here to where you can have variable endpoints, and you can also have, just straight up, just a static usernames if you would like. So the CLI, and then on the command group, I don't want to save this guy here. Through the command group, I can create my naming conventions, right? And by my naming conventions, I can say I want to manage any username that starts out with Cisco or starts out with Gluware, or you can create a section of usernames that you want to touch to where you don't want to touch certain users that are on there. You wouldn't include that in this case, right? So if I want to touch all usernames, I can just create a regular expression that can add anything, any matching username that exists on the device.
Okay. So any questions on the QoS segment? Because we're going to jump into a second use case where we're looking at NAC on layer 2 switches. Any questions, guys? Okay.
When you build the model, you'll have, I'll show it to you later, but we have a lot of those, like dozens of those threads of automation in the assembly now as we kept building and building and building, but the username was a good one, Alex. We haven't done that one yet.
Just a quick setup of this demonstration. As I was already talking about, NAC is a network administration control. It resides on generally access switches that people can plug into, so you want to secure the port. Again, there's the global level commands, there's port level. You don't want to put it on a trunk, you want to put it on an access port. And then as Sal was talking about the pre-Denali, post-Denali in Cisco's world, I think 16.3, it changed the configuration set. So it's not just completely straightforward. There's, in the Gluware terminology of conditional rendering to make decisions of where to apply the commands and then what commands to apply are all encompassed in this demonstration. So with that, we'll switch it back to the UI.
So with this use case here, right, this is when it comes to configuring switch ports, we do them somewhat a little bit different, right, in the way that we configure if we want to touch specific interfaces. So what we've done here is, you created naming conventions for the interfaces themselves, or for the interfaces on the devices, right, and how to talk to them, and what the model is going to be for this specific device. So in the case of NAC, we want to land, right, there's the global command that we want to land. When we did it with Merck, there was additional commands that were conditionals to any device that was post-Denali, right? So we had attached here to the side that was another item that would match, and it would be configured only if you match that condition, right? So we knew that all devices needed this command to turn on .1x globally, but then there was additional command that needed to be added, and that was only matched if it was a post-Denali iOS running. So with the global command, once that's configured, then you have, the commands that are gonna go on the interfaces themselves. And what we have here, right? So I'm simply specifying a variable that I'm not having to say, go configure on all these specific interfaces. I'm saying any interface that's gonna match a condition. And the model that I want, I'm also creating a filter that only touch certain commands. As you don't see here, I don't have the switch port commands, anything related to any other configuration. I only want to touch what's part of NAC. On top of that, right, there was a VLAN that we needed to configure, at least in the specific use case, that we need to have a fallback VLAN that if I can't talk to my AAA server, then go ahead and configure the VLAN that's already on our interface. Now, he already had the deployment. Some interfaces had NAC, others didn't, others had misconfiguration. And you want to be able to configure the and the access VLAN is different on every interface, right? So this fallback VLAN, the requirement here was it needs to be the VLAN that's specific to that interface. Now, trying to create a model that is going to be specific to that is just impossible to create that manually. So we're created with conditions. Once we match the conditions, right, which in this case is if the interface is found to have an access mode, and I define, and this is the item that I touched on earlier, right? You're either going to find variables that come from $context or $discover. The $context, you're providing these variables from your policy, and it's going to be from a JSON. The $discover is going to be part of that concept item or that set of instructions that we created, and they are simply regular expressions that you can match that it's going to have on that interface. So essentially what I called that one, right, was $discover.vlan.access mode, meaning that I created a regular expression and I gave it a name that's called access mode if it matches this condition, right? Switch port mode access on our interface, then it's going to be set to true, and I'm going to go ahead and push that configuration. So let's see, and on that filter as well, I also created a list of allowed commands, right? Because I don't want the engine to go and remove configuration that's unrelated to NAC. So in this case, these were the commands here that I want to allow, and it's full reject support as well. So we're going to go ahead and run a preview here, and I'll be able to show the differentiation of what the engine finds, right? On some interfaces are going to have NAC, some others won't. Other ones are going to have misconfiguration, and based on that, the engine is going to give you the output of your desired state.
Yeah, and this is really the power of the tool that you can really define exactly what you want to do, and if you want to touch some things, you can touch them. If you don't want to remove them or put them in, you don't have to. But this is exactly what we did. Ours looks a little different because there's many ways to do these threads of automation with Gluware. But the flexibility is amazing, and this is where we had to remove port security because it broke NAC, right? And that was found out till after we rolled out to thousands of switches. To say, oh, by the way, port security is breaking NAC, so we're able to fix it now.
So you can see as some of these interfaces here, right, I already have information. I have interface 2, I have a VLAN, but I don't have any switch port or any NAC configuration. I have interface 3 as well, switching back to the UI here, right? So I have interface 1 to where I'm configuring NAC, and I'm using the interface or the VLAN that is on my access interface there, right? And same thing with interface 3. I found on interface 4 that I have NAC configuration, but the fallback VLAN is not the same VLAN that is existing there, right? So even though my access VLAN is 100, I have my fallback VLAN as the 66, and the engine is resolving or fixing just that one line, even though the NAC is already configured on there. Right.
And just one other quick thing I'll mention about this. When I first started building this, we have all different types of switch stacks, any combination of 24, 48 port switches, 12 ports. When we first built it, we built models for all of them. And we said, well, why don't we just make an 8-stack, 48-port model, and we use that for everything? Because if it doesn't find those commands, it will not land the commands or move the commands, which was so we really just have common services, NAC open, common services, NAC closed, and that's really it. We're building one for security cameras now because it's still a little gray area what we need on security cameras, what we don't need. But moving forward, as we move forward into the 9300s to have Essentials license, we're going to build multicasting for security networks with Glue, and we're going to build multicasting for audio-video networks because we have a lot of digital signage and that type of stuff too. So that's kind of where we're going next at this point, and we'll do it with these existing models we have by just adding another block to the tool.
Yep. And so NAC was a good example of another fairly complicated technology to deploy. And if you had to do it manually, it's brutal, and you can see how a change window can take an hour per device. And your management was big on IQ, OQs, right? Like installation qualification and operational qualifications, all with pre-checks, post-checks, and you write those procedures. So if you can see where if this was done manually, what would be the duration to roll out on hundreds or thousands of switches? It would be a painful project. By automating, putting the time in up front to make the definitions in the product and then intelligently push it out, I mean, it is really a game changer. So it's been very effective for Merck.
Oh, yeah.
Sal, now, again, NAC being a complicated feature, if you will, you also did a bunch of the globals on layer 2 switches. So what, SNMP and NAC?
Yeah, layer 2 switches are done at this point. We built some models. Again, we have to really drill in and see what we really need on a shop floor switch because all of our shop floors are different, right? They're very, very different. Some of them have private VLANs on them, some have a lot of things. So we're really at the point now where our basic models are done for all types of layer 2 switches, whether they're 3750Xs. Any iOS XE switch has just one model now. And like I mentioned before, it's a logistical problem at Merck now, importing all these devices because the name of the switch isn't indicative of what it's doing, right? And we don't want to, no RGEs again, right? We don't want to push NAC to a shop floor switch. We'll actually break quite a few things. So that is my biggest challenge right now. But we do have this model, and I have from the ops guys what the series of commands that they do to do a pre-check on a switch. So we're going to use Glue to automate this, and just to, like, we import a bunch of switches. We'll do a pre-check with Glue and see what dysfunction of the network is, because you'll be able to tell that way, right? And get that data. That's it's not the technology right now. It's the logistics of identifying what type of device it is on our network.
And this reminds me of a statement I think Greg made, which was like, human engineered, but software automated, right? It doesn't take away the engineering component, and now you're able to do the value-added tasks instead of like the mundane and the these manual tasks. And so with that concludes demo number 2. We're going to have just a short transition to our next segment with our customer Terracon. We're going to welcome to a mini panel. And so there's really no official break here, but we'll just give you a couple of minutes while we change setups. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Drew Connery Murray from the Packet Pushers. We're here at Gluware Intent 19. Joining me is Ethan Banks. He's Packet Pushers co-founder and podcast host extraordinaire. Our guests are Don Seiler. He is VP of Strategic Accounts at Gluware. And our very special guest is Jamie Hughes, Infrastructure Architect at Terracon. Jamie, thank you for joining us. We're going to talk about how Terracon is using Gluware, talk a little bit about your automation journey, and then get into some demos about how you're actually using the technology. So to get us started, tell us about Terracon. What does the company do? How big is it?
So Terracon's an engineering firm, a little over 5,000 employees. Basically, we cover continental United States. We have roughly about 160 sites today. I'm fairly new to the organization, been there about a year roughly, and one of the challenges really struggling with is, we have probably about 700 devices. Keeping the config consistent. How do we, keep all the OSs in line? Take care of the vulnerabilities. So we're here, like I said, to discuss Gluware and how it's helped us.
I like that you're new to the organization and they said, here, you figure out this automation thing.
Well, actually, that was my push, because one of the problems, like I said, I'd worked on this before and used Prime Infrastructure in the past, and so I was kind of looking for a new tool. One of the problems I had with Prime Infrastructure, it was really intensive in resources. It was not intuitive. Going and trying to do, we were doing checks on this thing, and it would take me forever to go write all these commands and stuff, and I was like, there's got to be a better way.
So what were you looking for in an automation tool that you weren't getting from Prime or other places that you looked?
Well, one of the big things is I didn't want to have to go learn like a whole programming language. A lot of the tools I looked at, you had to do Python, you had to go, like you said, I've got some other guys, operation groups, and I need these people to be able to go pick something up and be able to deploy it. It needs to be simple to use.
So you didn't want to get into a whole bunch of retraining and knowledge engagement to get this off the ground.
Oh,
You just
yeah,
wanted
exactly.
to start.
Like you said, and and that's the perfect thing I think about Gluware is, like they were saying, like, you got the username as a simple thing. We did, some of the first things we pushed out, NTP, syslog, logging. One of the problems we had in the data centers is, the time was off on all the devices. I go to troubleshoot an issue and I'm sitting there trying to make a spreadsheet of, what time zone am I in on this one, and, map all that back to troubleshoot a problem. It's terrible.
Let me catch you up on something, though. You said it's not hard to learn, you can get it going quickly, but yet we were looking at a demo a little bit ago that looks like there is plenty of things to learn in the interface. So is the idea that, I can just pick and choose a few things to get started with and still make use of the product? I don't have to learn the whole thing, I guess, is where you're going.
Yeah, and I guess that's the piece, and I'm not going to say, it definitely, I've spent probably 3 or 4 months now working with the product. So if you look at it, it is kind of intimidating. And the piece about it is, though, you can learn a little bit at a time.
Yeah.
So I think that's the thing that helps with that a lot, is you don't have to go in and, like some of the stuff they're doing with variables, a lot of times people have static configs. So you can literally take those, paste those, your regular CLI commands that you're used to, and be like, here's my output I'm going to get.
And something that they had talked about earlier was how you can come to it doing what you already do. It's not asking you to essentially do anything new. Is that correct?
And that's true. Like you said, that's a lot of the thing that I find very powerful about it is, if I want to take and put a couple NTP servers and they're static in nature, I can literally just hard code those in that in the command line. It's something that my operation teams, that's the thing they do today. So if I give that them and have them put that in there, they could do that.
Okay. So one of the key use cases now you're using it for, the two things, standardizing configurations and OS upgrades.
Yeah. So that was the initial, one of the problems with our branch sites, and that's another feature about Gluware, is one of the first thing was to help with inventory. Since I was new at the organization, what do we have? What kind of equipment do I have? What models do I have? What versions of code do I have? It really helped me with that, because I was able to go, they had pretty good monitoring on the devices. So I was able to export out our monitoring tool and import all those devices into Gluware. And then it helped me, though, find out that, at our branches, we have 160 sites. I'm running 70 different versions of code. For three different pieces of equipment.
So it helped you discover the truth, but also put you back on your depression meds.
A little bit.
But I think that's also a core feature, and that's where you start, is with this inventory as the first thing you do.
Yeah, and so that helped me out a lot. And then Terracon, one of the other things, they grow a lot with M&As. with acquisitions. So one of the pieces we're on track probably this year to, we have 160 sites. We're probably going to add 20 to 30 sites. It's going to be a big year for us. Well, one of the problems that poses is, like you said, the versioning of the software. How do I get better at those things? Just the base config stuff, syslog time, username, passwords, AAA, banners, getting all those security things on there, getting them consistent. So, I think a lot of other people have kind of looked at this as brownfield, but in this case there, we started doing a little bit more greenfield in that case for our M&A because that was a big struggle for us. So we're pushing out that base config to all those new sites.
So I've been in this scenario before, but had to do it by hand, where I walked into an environment and a lot of the device configurations were not standard. They were unpredictable depending on what device it was. When you have to do that stuff by hand, something as simple as NTP, you have to manually look at them, see what NTP servers might or might not be there, remove the ones you don't want, and then add the ones you do. How did Gluware handle that specific situation when you got stuff on there you don't want and stuff on there that you do? It's not all net new.
Yeah, I think that's a huge benefit because, like you said, that's exactly the problem is you give 5 different people a task in operations and you're going to come up with 5 different answers to solve that problem. Now, they might all work, but like you said, when you go back and you have 150 sites that are like that, the NTP, we'll take that, like I said, your example there. The cool thing about it is you tell it what you want it to look like. So one of those servers might be on there, but I've got 3 others that are broken or those IPs don't exist in the network anymore. So, and I've added 2 new ones. So it will literally go on there and be, here's my 3 NTP servers. It will look on there, okay, to get to this, I can leave this one, I can remove these 3, and I add these 3. So it makes that, config remover real simple.
Actually, right, I've seen a demo of this, and it tells you, it gives you an output ahead of time. You know what's going to get pulled and what's going to get added.
Yeah, that preview, and like you said, and that's one of the things, lab testing, we have a pretty extensive lab environment to do all the testing for this, and that's really helped out is because I can go do those connected previews on these devices and run those commands and be like, what's going to happen when I do these things? To understand how the engine works and get my comfort level so that when we go deploy, like I said, take baby steps on deploying the lab, and then I can go deploy a couple of routers, and then when I go to, deploy to scale, I'm confident it's going to work.
So talk about that, I guess, in the context of standardizing around configurations. Before you even start pushing configs, how do you decide this is sort of our golden, what we're going to start with, our baseline, and then what was the differential that you went and discovered out there, and where are you in the process?
And like I said, one of those pieces is being new with the organization. A lot of that's just, okay, what's our current config? And then also trying to understand, where the business is at and what are the drivers, where we're going. And then, also leveraging my coworkers, what things do we need to add? And then, like I said, essentially we're taking our current config, in most cases modifying it, adding maybe some more security standards or doing some changes, and then that's what we're pushing out.
So this discussion wasn't just, a couple of network engineers deciding this is it. You had to bring in other folks in the organization?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So, and that's one of the reasons that, like I said, I think that, we chose to do the new sites first. Because in that case, we're just taking current config, and I'm like, they have a pretty good handle on here's what we want it to look like. So that made it a much simpler in that because I don't have to bring in, for that, I don't have to have all these discussions and, all these other people involved because, like I said, that's going to take a lot of time.
And in trying to standardize, did you run into issues like, oh, there's this config in there that if I just eyeball it, I think I don't really need that, but it's actually something that happens once a quarter, and if you pull it out, we just broke something.
And that's one of the pieces. We have a pretty extensive access list on our routers. So, and one of the unfortunate problems is there's a lot of unique variables in there. And so that initially caused a lot of problems right now. One of the things I've been using Gluware for, I didn't really think about using it this way, but the drift piece of it, I've actually been watching, I have all our devices in there now, and it spits out every day, hey, here's the changes that were made on the network today. Mm-hmm. So I've actually been kind of using that to go gauge, what are my operations guys doing today, that I don't realize they're doing.
Yeah, I was just going to say, so you haven't gotten to a place where you are forcing everyone to go through Gluware or some kind of an automation workflow in order to make changes. People can still make changes cowboy style.
Yep. Well, because we're kind of in that transition period. Gluware is not to the comfort level where, we don't have everything modeled. Like I said, we're working through those things, and it's more of new sites onboarding right now that we're using it for, and we're kind of testing the waters out. The major change we're getting ready to roll out is QoS through there. But one of the things that, like you said, I'm seeing the cowboy style, but it's also helped me understand, what kind of issues and what are major problems we're facing today. And that, like you said, one of the big ones is that access list, because I can see they have to go add stuff. So I can tell that that's, users are calling in and saying, hey, I can't get to something, and, this is probably, burning, 4 to 8 hours of resources every time, that occurs.
Mm-hmm.
Because, help desk is trying to troubleshoot is more likely they're troubleshooting as a computer problem.
Okay. And is that that alerting or warning on a configuration drift useful when you're trying to troubleshoot a problem? Or at least track down what happened?
Yeah, it definitely, because like you said, I can go back and, I have it set up every day right now. It sends a report out, and I can be like, and then I can see we changed 10 devices today, or, 50 devices, or however many. And then I can go into the tool, and it actually, you can sort by and say, hey, what devices are changed from the golden standard.
Well, I'm going to guess that you can say we, but you can say it was Bob, and you know what he did and call that guy.
I was going to ask, is there like an alerting feature you can put just for one particular person that you know? But maybe that's too personal. So one of the other features that you're using this for is OS upgrades. Can you walk us through that use case?
Yeah. So one of the pieces that Terracon's been working on is, like you said, there's a lot more software as a service, and we've moved to Office 365. That's definitely changed the dynamic of our edge sites a lot, because now the internet access at the site, instead of just backhauling all the traffic, we put firewalls out at the sites. Well, one of the problems we really struggle with, you put firewalls out there, well now, before I get a vulnerability on ASA, I got to go update a couple data center firewalls. It's kind of a pain, but, now I have, 100 plus, firewalls that we need to go upgrade.
Right.
What are these ASA vulnerabilities of which you speak?
Well, and that's the other thing. Like you said, the security team's coming back to me, and, they're like, you're not getting this done fast enough. I'm like, we just don't have the resources to build the, manually push those out.
They're making the bugs faster than we can fix them.
So that's a good question. And are you able to work with the security team through Gluware in terms of staying on top of security releases or PCerts, or is
So-
that just your domain and they have their own tools for looking at it?
That's very new, so I don't think they've really logged into that and, know that it exists. Maybe that's a good thing.
Okay.
Hopefully they're not listening.
And is it just all one? Is it all Cisco operating system that you're working on right now?
So
in terms of
today it's all Cisco. We have a few other things, but our main goal right now is, that's 90% of our environment is Cisco. So we're trying to, get that all automated and get all those things squared away first.
Is it a variety of different Cisco iOS families, software families, and so on?
Yeah,
So it's kind of like you have one code base to work with, but really it's a bunch of them.
it is. I mean, as far as hardware types, we have, like you said, we still have quite a few 1900 series routers, 2800 series routers, and then we have some 4Ks, 3Ks, just a bunch of different flavors.
Is there, can you, for instance, if for some reason you don't want to upgrade a particular operating system because maybe the code is buggy or because you're afraid of a change that's going to break something, can you sort of like in the system put a pin in it and say, let's give this 6 months and then come back to it or anything like that? Or is it just, how does that work?
Well, typically what we've kind of done is, you can tie an image to, so they have those assemblies that you can tie to devices. So we'll actually go in there and we basically name our images like production or candidate production. So we those ones there that we're going to push out on limited basis, we'll kind of name them and pick, less critical places to push those out, and then we'll do our testing that way.
Okay. And do you have a lab as well that you test?
And then we have lab too. So normally, like I said, usually we'll throw all the stuff in laboratory first. If laboratory, looks good, there's no, routing or switching works in that regard, and then we'll put it out to smaller production sites.
So you've got a process chain you set up. Let's lab this first, test it out, and then slowly push it out
Yep.
through the rest. Okay. That's great. Do you have a sense of the overall impact on day-to-day operations of using automation now? Like, how would you compare before and after?
And like I said, we're fairly new on our journey in this case, but one of the pieces is the, building to get those new branch sites, operating systems just all consistent. That's probably one of the things that really helped us out here at first. You know, and like I said, the goal is I'm hoping here to be able to get all our locations to that same standard.
Okay. And in terms of the human element, what's the attitude around automation? On one hand, it can be a little scary because, you know, with great power comes great responsibility. You can really break something. On the other hand, people may think this is automating my job away.
Yeah. And that's one of the things, when I presented this, we have plenty of other tasks to work on. So, you know, I definitely didn't, the ROI on this wasn't that we were going to be able to cut people. Like I said, we're continuing to grow a lot. So, you know, I mean, I think one of the selling points is I don't think we're definitely not going to cut people, but it gives us the ability to support more sites and be more agile at it. So,
Well, how did the team internally react to this? Like you're buying a tool that's going to automate my job away. Has there been any negativity that way?
you know, one of the pieces, I think there wasn't really too much negativity. They were just really curious, you know, what's this going to do? And there was some curiosity, like you said, what kind of stuff are they going to be working on? But one of the pieces, when I start talking to them, like, look at all these tasks. I was like, name our task list out. I was like, we're not doing these last 10 things. I was like, we got plenty of stuff for you to work on, you know. And I was like, how much, how fantastic is it going to be when the top ones, like you said, you go push out and config, you run into a nasty bug. Like we had, one where you were adding access list to a router and it would lock up. Well, when you have that many different versions of code, you're guaranteed, we're applying this out to a site. Yeah, hey, the first 20 went fine. We did site 21 and, if we do a change middle in the middle of the day, now that site went down for something that should have just been a very standard change.
I wanted to follow up on one other thing too. You mentioned ASAs, patching vulnerabilities. Are you also maintaining code and configuration on the ASAs using Gluware?
Not today, but that's one of the goals.
Okay. So if you said that before, sorry, I just want to.
No, and we didn't. Like I said, it's one of the things we've tested some in the lab
Yeah.
with those pieces, but we have not pushed any of that stuff to production yet. So that's definitely one of our goals, though, too, because that's the other thing is, if you have that many sites, if we want to add an object. I mean, just a simple thing is adding this same object to a couple hundred firewalls is not easy to do.
Yep.
Yeah, I remember working with your your Jason, your CIO, and you looking at the initiatives they even had for 19 and then in the 2020. It was really about helping just that agility of the team, because Jamie's looking at, holy cow, we've got all this to get done, plus the daily blocking and tackling we have to do, and it was really just helping them with his higher journeys to especially Azure and Office 365 that your team's aggressively rolling out. So.
Yep.
Okay, great. Well, thank you everyone for watching. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel to get more nerdy technical videos, and also check out packetpushers.net, where we have thousands of podcast episodes where you can go deep on networking and IT. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Again, thanks everybody for joining us today at Gluware Intent. Next, we're going to do some demonstrations of Gluware and how Gluware is being applied for our customer Terracon. One of the first demonstrations we're going to work with is our configuration drift and audit. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to our team. And
That's fine.
And-
Jump right into it. We had a slide that sets it up, but we already talked
oh,
about it.
sir.
Was there a clever animation, though?
So with that, we'll turn things over to our maestro here, Alex, and he'll go through as how we're doing audit and drift.
So yeah, with config, audit, and drift, as it started out, it was just config drift, where we would take snapshots of your configuration, do comparisons, and send out notices when we detected any changes in your configuration. So with the now released config audit, we're also able to audit those backed up configurations, those backed up snapshots for unwanted and wanted items on your configuration. And this has full regular expression support, right? So for this demo case here, I created a set of rules, like one of them, a rule name is for banner. I want to make sure that my devices are required to have a banner login. I don't want to add anything to the forbidden, right? So you have some items to where you can provide what's required, what's forbidden, or both, right? So in the case of SNMP, right, I want to make sure that my SNMP matches exactly to a certain model, and I don't have anything that it has private or public, or it has a set of hosts that I don't want on there. So to run this audit, right, I can select a set of nodes, and I can go ahead and hit run audit. Now this audit is being run on a snapshot that was already taken at the time that you do a discovery on this device. You have the option to go ahead and capture a new snapshot, which the engine will go log into the device, pull the latest configuration, and then run an audit on that. And you have the option to do, on your selection of devices, you can apply a filter or every single device that you have. You can also put this on a schedule, and the schedule has the capability of creating a dynamic map, right? So you can create a filtering that is dynamic, and as you add new devices or you remove devices from your inventory, that map is automatically updated and the policy is going to run against that map, right? So if you remove a device today, the device won't be audited. If you add a new device to your database, that device will start being audited as part of that schedule. So in this case here, I selected a few nodes. I'm gonna select the audit that I wanna run, and go ahead and hit start. So since we don't have to go to the device to pull out a new configuration, this runs much faster. Everything is running local, and it's just running against text files, right? And at the end of it, you're presented with the option to go see your results.
Now, Alex, quick question. You said the audit I want to run, as in I can have a whole bunch of different reports in there as I audit different parts of the config?
That's correct. So you can have multiple audits, and that's unlimited amount of audit rules that you can, or audit policies, as you want to may audit different type of devices, different type of configurations, right? And within those audits, you also can create an unlimited amount of rules per audits. Then you're also able to pinpoint or scope those audits to go to look at a specific location in your configuration. You don't have to say, look at my full config for this. You can say, I want to look at just banner, or I want to look at just SNMP. So you have the option to select those items to make that scope a little bit smaller and to speed up that process in what you're searching for. So, and you also have the capability of, you can export these audits and import it, and it's an easy export in JSON format that you can literally go in your JSON, and you can, go in a plain text file, and you can edit yourself if you want, and then just import it into a new device if that's what you want, right? So in this case here, I want to view results, and based on the policy that I created, you can have the results on a per device basis, right? So each device is going to tell you the number of violations that it has. In this case, this node has 62, and it will tell you what is missing, right? What's required. In this case, pretty much a good amount of them, a good amount of the items, the rules that I have on there are missing. And the amount of policies here, the amount of rules, can be different depending on the devices that you have on there. So, the next step is once you have these devices modeled, right, you can go and remediate this action, right? So if something is flagged hey, this is a violation, I can go into my model editor and configure modeling, and hey, I want to provision this device and put it back to the last standard, the way that it was, back to based on my model standardization. So when it comes to modeling, this is, it's pretty straightforward and simple. Any questions?
You just described a workflow process here that I want to dive into for a second. So
Okay.
I run an audit. I run whatever audits I want to. If there's a violation, something's out of compliance with what the rules say, I end up with a report, something telling me, hey, there's a problem with this configuration, and then I can go to that remediation step. So here's the question. Am I manually saying, okay, Gluware, go fix this problem that you found? Or is it an automatic thing where this is out of compliance and on some automatic cycle, it's going to fix whatever is out of compliance?
Yeah, at this time, that remediation, it is a manual process. You just have to go to.
Schedule it, you can trigger.
Well, you can have of course you can have your config modeling on a schedule that is constantly, right, checking. Anytime that there's a difference in your configuration, it does a reprovisioning. It puts back everything, right? So if you have it in that way, then yes. However, it does not have a trigger assigned to, I detected there's a violation on my audit. It does not trigger the modeling at this time.
Got it.
Right? It is a step in that direction. And as the customers get more comfortable with the platform, that would be the next step, is to automate that full process.
Another question here. You had mentioned results coming back in a JSON blob. Does that mean I can, from Gluware, send them to some other system and create a ticket maybe with that JSON data?
That's correct. So one of the use cases that this was, this part was created on, you have devices that are managed by a provider, and you have devices that are managed by your organization. Those devices that are managed by your provider, you can't configure it, you can't touch it. You can only read the configuration, so you can audit for things that are on there. And you're able to download this report, right, and send that report directly to your provider and say, hey, I have this device that's in violation, right? So then they're going to be able to log in and remediate it themselves, if you have a provider, that is.
And how about internally, if I need to bring in a security team or a compliance team, can I bring them into the workflow as well?
You certainly can, yeah. It's just a matter of downloading getting the same file and sending it to them. And if they have, if you've given that team access to do the read and write in the platform, they're able to go and remediate it themselves.
Now, if you do scheduled, you can also hook in notification. The notification can be via email, for example, whether you get email and you have violations or drift.
You need a mic, Mike.
Yeah. I'll just yeah, just to finalize that question was, if you have drift or audit scheduled, you can have a notification tied in where it can do things like an email notification to tell you have a violation or you have drift that occurred. So if you have certain people on a team that needs to get notified, you could hook it in that way as well. So the second part of what Alex is going to show is
And the other part that goes within here, right, is where you have drift, right? So with drift, and what you're seeing here is this is the full snapshot of your configuration. I can go and just make a very quick change here. Okay, and then I'm just going to run a snapshot on that device again, right? And so based on the configuration changes that the engine performs or it notices, you can get it whether you get a notification. Is that the same device? I think I already had that interface on there. So with config drift, you have a history of all your configurations. That anytime that you run take a snapshot, you keep a full history of any changes that have been made. So in this case, right, the capture status, The icon that you're seeing above is where, that's unchanged, and this icon that you see now, that's the one that it has changed, right? And based on the changes that you see, right? So I already had look back interface on there, so that's why I didn't detect on the first one. As I added the description, you can see the changes that it has made. If that's the desired configuration, you can promote that as your golden configuration. You can download that configuration. But yeah, so you have a full history of basically any time a snapshot is taken. And within here, you can also do, you can change display mode to be able to see the full config or just pieces of that configuration.
So, any questions on drift and audit? We'll move on to the next use case. Any questions? Sure. Oh, wait, let's get a mic. Hold on a second. Can you hear me that one? Check. On.
So everything that we looked at so far was, and correct me if I'm wrong, maybe I missed something, are configuration templates that were built. Is everything purpose-built from scratch when you work with a customer, or are there any pre-built best practices, like this is what a BGP config should look like, something like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And when it comes to the so-called kind of feature packages, the way it is built is that, generally, and again, 3.0 when we introduced it, we helped onboard and build it for you. In I think it was 3.2, we introduced onboard yourself, where it essentially reads in those features using a workflow wizard, and then essentially just builds those building blocks. But your question is also, well, what about other examples, and what about what is pre-shipped? We don't pre-ship it, but we do have the ability. The engine, and not in drift and audit, well, actually with audit, we can share audit policies. But in the configuration features, we have the ability to import, export packages. So we have built, Gluware has built numerous example feature packages that you could install and run. In fact, what Alex is running on here is something we call the VPOC. The VPOC is a set of devices that has all our example package configurations that are very turnkey. And let's say you even had a lab with like Cisco 1000V virtual routers, we could give you a bunch of packages that would just work with those devices with just very little editing. So part of it is that the playing with it, the learning it, the kicking the tires. When you actually enter a POC, like a proof of concept, where you want to make sure you're validating certain things to accept it into your organization, generally that's when we either help you to build those or show you how to build them and ensure it's going to meet your use case. So I know it's a fairly long answer, but it's a bit of both. There's some examples that we provide. We show you how to take them right from your configurations, and then there's a bit of customization that may need to be done to meet your very specific use cases. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, let's get the mic. Mind handing it down to you?
So our firm is financial services, and I'm going to struggle with this question a little bit, so bear with me. One of the struggles that we have is auditing changes, right? So IT, and this looks like a great tool to standardize, deploy the change. There's also a separate tool, the service manager, where your change request goes in, and then our governance is looking at another tool as well, like a tripwire. Right now it's very manual, right? Governance sees something in tripwire that changes, now you got to map that to a CR, then that CR they all need to reconcile each other. This looks like maybe something that our governance people could be using, or I heard the statement before that some of these commands can be exported to JSON and be used in other systems. Obviously, that's a very specific question, but in that type of a situation, how could this help reconcile those three different things?
Sure. There's really kind of two parts to that are, what organizations use the product, and then what about workflow when there's an actual, it's got to flow through different groups, and then sometimes you have ITSM service managers like ServiceNow or something else tracking it and potentially needing an approval to make a change. And so, generally the tool is used, or the platform's used heavily by network operations, those responsible for the network layer configuration. Certainly as NetOps grows and they have, kind of break down silos, you get security and audit and other teams that are all using the platform as well and have logins and have certain roles and responsibilities they can do. So there's user management and roles and responsibilities that can be assigned. And the second piece of your question around service flow and service management, it's actually a nice tie-in probably to the last segment we're going to do after this use case, which is around API integrations, because, and there's another thing which is something we call in our product a workflow, where you may have to do pre-checks and it may have to go get an approval, and it may tie back to a pre-verification, a change, a post-verification. There can be API integration with platforms, let's say, that need a copy of the change, or the workflow where I need to make sure an approval was granted to make the change. Those would either be API integrations today, which are somewhat custom. You'll hear more about APIs coming up, and as well as those pieces for approvals and things like that. So, yeah, I think it's generally Gluware addresses those things with a construct we call workflows and custom integrations. Okay, so with that, we're moving on to the second use case, and I'll very quickly set it up. I grabbed it here. So the second use case, with which are switch to. So here we go. How to present here again. All right. Presentation mode. And OS upgrade. Animated PowerPoint. Come on, guys. So very quickly here, Alex is going to run you through what OS upgrade looks like, and it's been talked about a little bit before, but grabbing TFTP an image onto a box and typing reload, you would think could be like the simplest thing you could do, but an operating system upgrade is painfully process-oriented in terms of the pre-verification you have to do, the format of the image, the compatibility verification. Once you push the image onto the device, if it's past the checksum. I mean, there are just numerous failure points, and if you get it wrong and you reload that device and it's not a compatible image, or the image wasn't whole, you just bricked it, and now truck roll and resume generating event, right? Possibly, maybe. So we're going to take a look at how Gluware automates this process of the OS upgrade. So with that, we'll switch back over. And again, could be an OS downgrade, could be a patch. There's various forms of general operating system management.
Yeah, so again, with OS upgrade, currently it's, we're over here on the model editor. Eventually this will have its own application for OS management, right? So as the model editor is more of a sandbox place that we can create things and modularize everything. And once we kind of understand the processes of how we want to present this application, then we move it into its own application, which will be the next step. However, so right now I have this device. This is a Cisco 3925, I believe, that I want to run an upgrade on. And the three things that you have to create, right? So this is the minimum requirements. Since Gluware is not actually going to the Cisco website, we're not going to your repository server, and we're downloading anything. You do have to provide your own images, right? Granted, based on the support images that you do have, or support contracts that you do have. You have to specify your location to where those images are located, and the protocols supported go from FTP, HTTPS, SCP, TFTP. With TFTP, we do make sure to optimize the file transfer, so we change the block size to be the largest it's capable on the device. So if it's by default it's set to 512, we make sure to check the configuration. We try to understand what's running on there, and we optimize it to speed up the file transfer process. But in this case here, I'm just using SCP, and you'll provide the image name that exists on that file server, right? And as you can see, I have different sets of different images, and it just so happens that for this combination here, I have the latest image desired, and I'm pointing to the repository server. Within here as well, right, you have the options to where you're upgrading, so if you want to do a ROM-on upgrade, there is also support to specify your ROM-on files, right? If you're doing a ASA upgrade, you can specify your ASDM files. You also can do an XOS upgrade, which is currently supported, in case you have to provide your management interface in order for the management interface to talk to the file server. So in this case here, I have the assembly already attached, or my firmware policy already attached to my assembly, and within there, I don't have a catalog, but you have the option to create a catalog, and this catalog for your architects, this is read-write, right? But to your operators that are going to be doing the deployments, they can be read-only, so they can't touch your set of authorized images. So if that authorized image is part of an assembly and you try to do a provisioning to a set of devices, the engine is going to fail that OS upgrade. It's going to give you an alert letting you know, hey, this image hasn't been authorized yet. For the process here, I've already done the file transfer just to speed up the processes, and I'll walk through the logs here. But essentially, as you do an OS management, right, you can schedule to do a transfer the image, or you can do transfer the image and reboot. And the transfer the image is something that, it's simply going to put the image at the location in your device, puts you in a file system, and gets you ready so that you can schedule a upgrade and reboot, the transfer and reboot, which will set the boot statement and reload the box at a later date. So for this case here, I'm going to go ahead and do a start action. In case you can also provide, a service request number in the logs that can be downloadable if needed.
When you do an OS upgrade like this, occasionally there will be some new command or change in the next version. Is there an awareness that, hey, you're upgrading to this and that may change your standard configuration in some way?
Right. Currently, there is not an awareness of the command changes, right? So that is something that it is always, as you as recommended, you always put an image in the lab and you make sure that your commands still function before you go ahead and start pushing that image to your production.
A best practice is to run the drift afterwards, because the drift will actually flag that change, and then you can then update your policies correspondingly. Yeah, that's a good one, because sometimes you don't know of those changes, and that's a good thing. The drift will flag that. So we're kind of short on time, so we're going to just run through a quick highlights of what all the things the Gluware engine is doing behind the scenes in the log here.
So as the engine logs into the device, right? First steps first is it checks make sure that you have a boot statement in your flash, right? It checks if you have the Cisco API enabled. It does check with the Cisco API, and it does make sure that the image that you're transferring is indeed supported by this platform. If you don't have the Cisco API access, the engine is going to trust that the engineer understands what they're doing and is going to put the image on there, right? But having the Cisco API access is definitely, highly recommended, and most customers that do have that kind of gear will have support. So you only need support for at least one device in your network, and you should be able to gain access. So as long as you have SmartNet at one device, then you can get the same access, and we can provide full instructions on how to get it. It's fairly easy. But the engine does put a file on there, right? It puts a lock file to make sure that there, if in environments where you have multiple servers, multiple engines, and it could be that hey, something is executed multiple times, and there's two OS upgrades going on one device. That lock file will let the engine know and make sure so that you don't have two upgrades going on at the same time. Moving on, the engine does check to make sure that the file does exist on there. So in this case, no file transfer is needed. If a file transfer is needed, we usually spawn off a second SSH connection to that device to kind of monitor the progress of that file transfer, right? And once that file transfer has completed, we'll go through the verify process, and then eventually we'll clean up the locks. Now, if I had scheduled to do a reboot on this device, the engine actually waits for the device to come back up and it verifies that the image that you try to put on there is intended the image that you ended up with. Right? So once the device comes back up, it will go ahead and delete that log file, verifies it, and then it marks the upgrade as complete. In this case, it was just a bundle image. We do support full install mode as well. And if you have a device in a stack, like for example, if you have a device in the stack and you upgrade with just a binary with your bundle image, not the tar file. If you do a tar file, then the iOS itself will be intelligent to copy that image throughout your stack. However, if you provide just the bin file, right, the engine or the iOS will not be able to copy that image throughout your stack. However, we also added the code to be able to do that as well. And without having the need to go to one of the to go to the file server, we just copy it from the one server and complete it. So yeah.
Yep. Step up to the mic.
One quick point to Ethan is that we did this exact same thing with pre-Denali and post-Denali, that we modeled it to go and look at the configurations for NAC once you did pre-Denali, and it automatically fixed it. So we planned for that statement because we knew what would happen with NAC. But to your point is, you don't know a lot of the other stuff. Like we tested that, right? But to your point, we did plan that into our upgrade to Denali, post-Denali.
So that concludes the OS upgrade demo. Hopefully everyone can appreciate all the complexity that goes into that. So we are scheduled to go right into an API segment. So Jeff Boone, are you ready to come up? He's become an audience member. Forgot he's got to get up here and present. So Ethan and Grip, I don't think we need any formal. We can just get right into it. So I'll introduce our VP of Engineering at Gluware, Mr. Jeff Boone. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you all. Good afternoon. We've heard a lot today about technology and about the use cases that have taken place at Merck and at Merck and at Terracon. All of this information is being collected, whether it's audit information or the config files or the versioning of instance data from a CLI standpoint and the way that CLI evolves and grows. And our technology stack and all the great folks back at Gluware that the architects and the designers and developers that have put their lifeblood into building and delivering this product have made that available through our Gluware user interface. But there are many use cases in enterprise software today where you want to tie that into the rest of your enterprise and the rest of your system. The Glue API gives us that portal to access all of the data and underlying objects, elements, events that exist within Gluware. In addition to that, we've talked about some of the integration capabilities where we have taken third-party APIs and actually brought them into our user interface. And we'll touch briefly on that. You've seen it before. We've talked about it, the Cisco integration. So version 3.5 of Gluware introduces our API. It is a traditional API endpoint that's installed with our software. It's run as a service, and all of the documentation is available through the endpoint itself. In addition, we are publishing to our GitHub repository multiple examples for how to interact with it and how to use it. Now, right now, we have one in particular that we'll be showing in a little while, but our goal is to expand that repository, again, with multiple examples and different real-life use cases, especially that our customers bring to our attention. As I said, the API itself is very traditional. It's a standard REST endpoint. We use standard HTTP features and capabilities. The user authentication is done in the same form as it is with Gluware. Therefore, if you have read-only operators, or you have full system developers that have full read-write access, the API will behave for them as you would expect or anticipate. We use cross-origin resource sharing to protect that endpoint, make it as secure as possible, although in an on-prem installation, obviously this is all going on within your installation. And all of the results, all of the information is fed back via JSON, whether it be error messages or otherwise. We are starting small. Many other vendors start out at the other end of the spectrum and just give you everything in one fell swoop, and you have to figure out and sort it out. We are introducing first our device management capability. So the problem we're addressing first off is inventory management and control. Our organization structures are made available to search and to find your organization. The device management structure is made available, which provides you all of the information that you would find in Device Manager. So again, modeling the user experience of our UI in our API. The ability to search, obviously do all of your CRUD services, your create, your read, your update, and your delete, as well as access to that device detect capability that you saw Alex demonstrate earlier. The ability to go out and query the device for all of the details associated with the make, the model, the vendor, regardless of vendor type, the operating system version, the serial number, the product ID, et cetera, and so forth. If you are using the integration to Cisco's API, we also provide you back the number of alerts, advisory alerts, the EOX end-of-life information, dates associated with all the above.
So Jeff, this API is net new. In other words, the UI I see with Gluware is not an API consumer. This API is something that you've newly created and exposed for users to consume?
Correct. We basically have started to whitelist all of the interface capabilities that we have in our product, and we're just doing it section by section.
Yeah.
And so that takes us to where we're going, which is to open up the remainder of the Gluware user experience, giving you direct access to audit and config information, all of the actions and events that exist within the UI, and in particular then giving you access to the instances and configuration data itself on the box, so that we could operate in a headless environment, or we could operate again as part of some workflow. Some of the examples are the inventory management, so the ability to add devices and validate your inventory resource system. So whether it's wanting to validate and understand that you want to know what OS is running on that box and update your asset management system, or you just want to create whenever a new device hits the loading dock, you want to make sure that that gets into Gluware, that it's then assigned to the appropriate assembly, and that when it comes on the network, it can be appropriately provisioned.
But part of this, I'm able to use the Gluware or the Glue API as kind of an abstraction layer for a lot of these devices that are there too, that are underneath. I don't need to learn all of their APIs. I can talk to Glue, get a bunch of information in a standard way, and I'm done.
Correct. I mean, you are, for those people that are, and I wanted to ask by a show of hands, how many people are actually doing API development with vendor APIs today? Oh, there's a rousing endorsement.
We're reluctant to let my guys do it yet. And I don't know if I'd go as far as going all the way in with non-software developer quality code, hitting APIs when
Okay, fair enough. I also think that some of these other use cases, for instance, drift and audit. So we were talking before about the example of being able to notify individuals when a particular event occurs. So our audits can be scheduled and run on a regular basis. If you're running that every day, you want specific information to go straight to your security team. You may want to update knock information for your operators. Then being able to go back and using the API, to the example that we were talking about, trigger a remediation of that device, or trigger an alert to an individual to take that action, is all possible directly via an API. The last example is change management. We have had multiple requests for a variety of different internal workflows where companies want to say that once a change is ready to be made, they want to get that preview that you saw. They want to take that preview and bundle it up with some other information and send that off to their change management group for approval. When that approval is given, allow the trigger to take place within Gluware to actually execute that on a scheduled basis or on a planned basis. And these are just some of the ideas of ways that Gluware can exist within a broader ecosystem of applications at a customer's location. So moving on, you've seen this a couple of times, but just to reiterate, we are bringing Cisco's data into Gluware, so making it part of the user interface. In the demonstration you saw before, you saw the alerts and the events. You can see the history of those, all of the current open and active advisories on the box, all of the end of life, end of service, end of support provided, and then SmartNet details, what's your contract ID and what's the expiration date on that contract. It was mentioned that it requires Cisco authorization, as all things do at Cisco. So very simply, going to the Cisco's API console, entering your information, getting approval and getting an ID, and then they have quite a list of APIs, and we give you a shopping list to check the boxes and make sure that all these APIs are active. But then you'll get back a security key, an API key that you enter into Gluware's interface, and that makes it all the easier. We can then query that on any scheduled basis you like. So these are just some examples of Gluware trying to fit better within the enterprise environment, more integrated into the workflows and processes that our customers are using. And with that, any questions?
So to everyone, in the interest of time, because we're about 30 minutes over at this point, we're going to just post a recorded demo and let Alex off the hook on this one. So we're, yeah, we're going to try to jump back, almost not quite, but almost on time. And any questions on APIs or API integrations? We're good? Okay, so the demo will be recorded and posted on the gluware.com/packetbutchers page, as well as the Packet Pusher YouTube channel and all that when it becomes available. So we're going to take a 10-minute break and start back at 4:15, where we're going to do the 1-hour live Packet Pusher podcast, which will be recorded right here. So let's take 10 minutes and reset for the podcast.
Thank you.
Here it comes.
3, 2. Welcome to Packet Pushers Heavy Networking, the podcast that just gets to the good parts quicker than most people can crack open a textbook and find the right bloody chapter. In today's sponsored show with Gluware, we're diving into the network intent-based networking pool, but we're doing it live from New York. Woohoo! Awesome! So I'm going to start the discussion with a controversial position. Calm down, Ethan. Don't let the excitement get to you. I don't believe that automation is the answer to SDN. I think that most people have got the wrong end of the stick in this one. So let me explain. Let's say you learn yourself some Ansible or some SaltStack and you start using some playbooks to get stuff done. You feel pretty good about yourself because you've done something that looks a bit like magic and it's actually getting some results. It's pretty simple, but you're doing something better, faster, more reliably. And it's so good you wonder why you didn't do this years ago, because it actually wasn't all that hard. And then you realize that Ansible doesn't have any programming features. Its looping features are a bit limited. It's not really able to make decisions. It doesn't do for loops. And you want to integrate with some other tools. So you start learning some Python to cover the bits you haven't got. And then you need to upgrade from a YAML file where you're storing all your configs to shove them into a SQL database to hold the network configuration. And then you've got some Git to store the configurations. And then you realize you need a differ. And then all of a sudden your Python code starts to look like an awful lot of work. So now you've got a Python problem, or more correctly, a network development problem or a software problem. GUIs, databases, you've got script versioning, you've got Ansible templates that work for exactly this model of that switch when the moon's in the fourth quadrant and the scorpion is in a highlighted segment of the world, and you're starting to wish that maybe you hadn't started with automation. So you start thinking about an orchestration solution, right? And you think, oh, I'll move to some APIs, that'll simplify my automation, and I'll have an orchestration that will run all the automations. And then all of a sudden you start to think, I need a policy engine that's going to do these things, and you're just starting. So think about when you start down your automation path, what is this going to look like in 5 years? You don't want to end up with your CLI just giving you all this pain and problems that you've never had. So you've got to consider just how much code you can maintain or sustainably maintain. Otherwise, you're going to be right back in the land of command line interfaces and, banging your fingers into bloody little stumps on the keyboard because you'll be hacking code up and stuck in manuals at 2 o'clock in the morning. I mean, the point of automation is that you're not awake at 5 o'clock in the morning doing stuff. Right, Sal?
Some
nodes in a couple hours, right? And so those are two key things, the concept, intent engineering, and then the product of how you realize it.
Now, we've talked about Gluware over the years because you've been on and off the show for 3 or 4 years now. And the key part about your technology is that engine in the middle. You've got this software engine that can take the existing configuration, munge it with some little elven magic in places, and sometimes it's just straight up logic and common sense, and out the other end comes this ability to do things that I probably want to do. So the magic here is read from the configuration of the existing network, and it can be a new network, it doesn't really matter. You have the models, you create the modeling architectures, and then the engineer sits down and works out what he wants to say and how it's going to go. Hmm.
Like right from the beginning, something glitched and turned off the audio, so
Okay,
it's back up again. You want to take it from the top?
take it from the top. Awesome. I
The
get
top
to
of the whole show?
Yeah, the whole show.
Wow. You got the magic still?
This is the. This is the magic of podcasting. This is what you don't see when Packet Pushers is doing it on the internet. You only hear the post-edited version.
Nice.
So, welcome to the jelly.